Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. Let's try that again. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Okay. I wanted to make sure everybody knew next week's speaker is David Sears from the Department of Educational Studies here at Purdue. And so next week's event is also hosted by the ASWE Student Chapter. Which reminds me, are there announcements from the ASWE Student Chapter or the Engineering Education Graduate Student Association? Lee?
Yes, the ASWE Student Chapter would like to announce that directly following this seminar, we have a presentation and QA session on jobs in engineering education, how to get them. I think has implications potentially both new students and students who are further along. And also about 7 pages of URLs and resources for further things to look at as a part of that. And next week, after Dr. Sears' seminar, we're convening a faculty research panel on research into studying like groups of people with Dr. Olin. Dr. Sears will stay on, and Dr. McComb from nursing is actually joining us. So we'll have a very diverse group with a lot of, we'll be right here in this room, yes. But follow the seminar directly as many of our events do. So I hope that sounds interesting to many people, both the one today and the one next week, and people will show up.
Excellent. Are there other announcements? Okay. This week's snacks are provided by Chanel and Rose. Thank you very much. Okay. Which reminds me, there's still space to, I think we have 2 for each of the next few seminars. And I'll also pass around the attendance sheets. So sign up, sign in. I'll sign in myself. If you're a visitor, you're welcome to sign in, and so that please sign in so that we know that we're here and where you come from. If you provide your email address, you can then receive announcements of seminars. So there's also space to sign up to bring snacks if you have not already done so. Today's speaker. Today's talk is being boilercast. Today's speaker is Dr. Francis Carter Johnson. Dr. Carter Johnson likes to collect academic degrees. You see Master of Science, PhD. So he holds degrees in physics from Spelman College, mechanical engineering from Georgia Tech, a master's degree in physics from Mississippi State, master's in applied physics from University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and her doctorate is in public policy from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. She works at the National Institutes of Health. She's a labor economist and policy researcher there in the NIH Division of Biomedical Research Workforce. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Carter Johnson.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would first like to thank Michael and Jennifer DeBoer for having me, and the Purdue Department of Engineering Education for inviting me up and having me here. Michael wanted me also to talk a little bit about my career path and how I, as a policy researcher, a PhD in public policy and undergrad degrees in engineering and physics, like many of you, how I ended up at the National Science Foundation. So I will talk a little bit about that. Don't have a slide about it in the beginning, but I do talk about it a little at the end as well. I'm done collecting academic degrees. Michael was saying earlier that maybe I'm still collecting. No, I'm done collecting academic degrees. There is a time and a place to stop. But I finished my last degree in public policy at University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And that degree was, the concentration for that degree was evaluation and analytical methods. So I think that there are quite a few people here that build experience, I think, in evaluation as well. So evaluation is very valuable within the federal government. The National Science Foundation, the Department of Energy, the National Institutes of Health are all looking for people with technical backgrounds who are interested in evaluating both their programmatic activities, but sometimes their science programs as well. NSF is starting a EAC, an evaluation capacity unit right now. They're building it up right now, and they're looking for people with backgrounds just like yours and mine, with undergrad degrees and master's degrees in engineering and science, with PhDs in social science fields with evaluation experience to work on helping them shape and create how they evaluate their scientific programs. I ended up at NIH because being in Baltimore and being in close proximity to NIH and NSF, one of my data geek dreams was to have access to NIH data, NIH peer-reviewed data. So I looked for opportunities where I would be able to do that, either as a federal employee, and it's a little easier to get access to the data and use the data, analyze the data when you're inside the federal government. So one of the opportunities to do that was the AAAS. AAAS stands for American Association for Advancement of Science. But AAAS has a Science and Technology Policy Fellowship Program. Has anyone here heard of that program? Okay, the goal of that program is to infuse scientists, just like you and I, into the federal government, to infuse science into federal policy making. So you have an opportunity to go into the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health, USAID, Department of State, Department of Energy. You could go to any possible agency, and your work and your brain as a scientist is highly valued. They want to continue, they want you to be able to continue and apply your science into federal policy making. Sometimes that's not in a lab, of course. You're no longer really in a lab, but you do have an opportunity to apply your degree in a way that you might not initially think about. And we can talk about that a little bit more at the end of my talk. Well, my talk, Identifying and Improving Socio-Cultural Factors in Research to Broaden Participation and Advancement in STEM, really stems from my dissertation research that looked at measuring scientific self-efficacy and scientific research proficiency in undergraduate research participants at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. It's a blend of my work in that area as a PhD student, some work that I've done as an independent evaluator in between my time before I came to NIH, and then taking a look at how NIH and NSF and other federal agencies can begin to help improve these social-cultural factors, help improve measurement and utilization of them more broadly. So my problem starts with after, have we seen success or failure in terms of our 40 years of federal funding to increase representation in STEM fields. And when I talk about representation, it's important to note that NSF in particular, and NIH to a degree, their broadening participation efforts don't just include race or gender. They're very expansive. They include ability status or disability status, however you'd like to refer to that, and they include geographical differences. And I think that is particularly important, I think, for universities like Purdue, where you might have a larger concentration of students from rural areas. I'm from a rural area. I'm originally from Mississippi. My first engineering job was in upstate New York at Corning Incorporated, which was a really, really rural place as well. But it wasn't as small. Corning wasn't as small as my hometown. The way I measured the smallness of Corning was Corning had 3 exits off the freeway. My town only had 1. So it's really important that some of the same issues that you see in terms of educational disparities, they happen across racial and ethnic groups, but they also happen in highly urban or highly rural institutions where students are just not exposed to STEM courses to prepare them for the degrees that we have been as fortunate to participate in. So some of you have seen this data. This is just a hint at the data. This is NSF's demographic characteristics of engineers by race, ethnicity, and by gender. But NSF also provides this data in terms of, they provide it in terms of disability status, but they do not provide it in terms of rural origin, so the origin of their education. I was on their website this morning and yesterday in preparation for this presentation, and there are no charts to tell us where students are coming from and where they're prepared. So if that's a passion of yours, if you're interested in rural education and rural STEM education, and if you want to work for the federal government, then that's a point of data that appears is not even being collected yet, that needs work. So these, when they address this problem, the problem of representation, there are a myriad of ways to address these, but they've mainly been referred to as pipeline policies. And the pipeline policies, as you all are well aware, range from K through PhD, or can be grouped in terms of K through PhD STEM education, STEM workforce development, and developing research capacity. My research focused on the higher education policy responses. So I talked about measuring undergraduate research participation and really understanding what the benefit of undergraduate research participation was, but also scholarships and financial assistance to retain and recruit students into STEM programs and intervention programs, as well as grants such as Advanced Grant that Purdue has had, and numerous other grants are higher education policy responses to improve representation over the years. They're referred to as STEM pipeline or diversity policies, and we all, as engineers, from when I did engineering in the 90s, giving away not age, but we become accustomed to the pipeline, the STEM pipeline, and referring to this as the STEM pipeline. But there are efforts now to not refer to it as a STEM pipeline for a couple of reasons. Leaks, when you refer to losing students as a leak, and that concept and that thought, it focuses on the data and the numbers, and it doesn't focus on experiences. It focuses on deficits, and it doesn't necessarily focus on what's happening, what are we doing right in some environments to retain and recruit students. There's also a tendency for these evaluations to not be culturally relevant, and again, that's not just by race or gender, that's whatever environment you're in. What's the culture of that environment, and how do you make your evaluations and your research appropriate for those different groups? So there's a myriad of limitations and results to the STEM pipeline. Who's familiar with the effort to change the language around STEM pipeline? Okay, so this isn't just me. I'm preaching to the choir. You all hear this all the time. You may agree, you may not. I focused a lot on the limitations in terms of metrics and in terms of definitions and metrics of success and metrics of these social cultural factors that I've talked about. One way that NSF has approached this, and a couple of researchers at NSF, has been the science of broadening participation. Again, who's heard of the science of broadening participation? Okay, a few people. So I first heard of the science of broadening participation when I attended the Understanding Interventions Conference which is a conference of researchers from that work on interventions that are in both NSF and NIH funded to broaden participation in either in biomedical and in STEM research careers. I heard the term in 2008, and if you're a scientist, a geek, as we all are, researchers for life, the science of broadening participation really allowed me to blend my science background and my social science research background that I was preparing to pursue, because I wanted to increase the empirical rigor around intervention programs and analyzing intervention programs. So the science of broadening participation, and then I've called it science of broadening participation and advancement, because we are not just looking at bringing students or students participating and performing better, but how do all of the students or all of the representatives in all of different groups, how are they advancing once they enter STEM as well? So what does the science of broadening participation do? It's empirical research on access, inclusion, and retention. It brings together different fields. It is especially focused on bringing together researchers from social science and scientific fields to bring interdisciplinary knowledge to work on these problems. It looks at documenting successes as well as inequalities in education and economic opportunities. It takes a different look, units of individual analysis instead of just only systems analysis. Collaboration between, I talked about that, and it's informed and built on existing social science and behavioral science theories that often come from psychology and sociology, as well as evaluation fields. It's both quantitative and qualitative, and it's designed to potentially disrupt and create new paradigms. We talked about changes in this STEM pipeline paradigm, but the science of broadening participation is a way to create new frameworks and provide evidence for potential new frameworks for the STEM pipeline. A very important part of the science of broadening participation is having researchers from diverse and scientific cultural backgrounds. These are some examples. Kalina Craig Henderson was a social psychologist. She was originally at Howard, but she came to NIH and started this science of broadening participation movement. And now there are dear colleague letters and funding opportunities for people who are doing research around the science of broadening participation. Dr. Freeman Rabowski is the president at UMBC, where I did my PhD, but he's a leader in both creating programs and creating scientists who want to study these different areas. And Jessa Diaro is a former advanced and AGEP directorate program director at NSF. Why is it important? It's not just important to have researchers from diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds, but we need researchers with lived experiences that can speak to whatever area we're trying to broaden participation in. So if we're thinking about broadening participation and advancement of people from rural areas, then it would help to have someone who has studied science, who grew up in a rural area, myself being from Mississippi. You know what the problems are, you know what problems students are facing. So it might not, it helps to have either lived experiences or from your personal life, or lived experiences as a mentor or working with students from those areas, so that you can know what the issues are. And as you're designing your programming, you can design factors and activities that support and scaffold these students. So it's really, really important, and that's important part of the science of broadening participation. So I'll get a little bit into important social-cognitive factors from my research, and that are also really important to the science of broadening participation, and you all are probably very familiar with them. And I talk about them. This is where I can talk a little bit about my work at NIH too, without going into too much detail, because I wasn't approved to talk about my NIH work in gory detail. But self-efficacy is one's judgment of his or her capabilities to organize and execute actions for science performance, if you're looking at scientific self-efficacy. Stereotype threat is what happens sometimes when students are made aware of fitting into a particular group and possible reduces in performance and expectations. And imposter syndrome, the inability to internalize one's own accomplishments. So these are some important socio-cognitive factors that have been researched for years, and now NSF and NIH are trying to, the federal agencies are trying to determine, are these factors present in things like peer review? Are they how present are, how well can we measure them in our programs, in our diversity programs? The work that I did, and I talked to some of the professors earlier today in NIH, was on fairness in the peer review process at NIH. That was my first project. There was an economist, Donna Ginther from Kansas, who published a paper on potential racial disparities in NIH R01 grant funding in 2011. So NIH's response to that has been to say, is there bias, potential bias in the peer review process? And where does that bias come from? Does it come from the reviewers? Does it come from the criteria, the review criteria and the way the process is done? Or does it come from, individuals? So are individual applicants, grant applicants of different groups, are they experiencing stereotype threat, and does it influence their writing? So there are multiple avenues that NIH is beginning to investigate that are really interesting and very important to the science of broadening participation. I wanted to give a little bit more, but I think you all are very familiar with this. I did a similar talk to this at the American Association for Physics Teachers earlier this year, where I explained the scientific self-efficacy or self-efficacy theory. And a lot of your professors here in the department do research. Some of your professors do scientific self-efficacy research, but there are basically 4 different areas, as you can see on the board, that influence self-efficacy of a particular student. Content accomplishments, vicarious experiences, social persuasion, and having positive psychological and emotional experiences that are thought to potentially influence self-efficacy. And if you design programming in your courses or in research that influences these, that's how you change self-efficacy, and that leads to changes in behavior or performance. Where is self-efficacy used in STEM? I just gave some examples of recent papers and papers that I've used on self-efficacy in STEM, research motives of faculty in academic STEM. So again, that was a paper that I used for the peer review work. So there's been a lot of self-efficacy research regarding students, and so engineering students in science courses, but there's been very little research around self-efficacy for writing grants or self-efficacy with faculty. So that was one of the areas of research when I was at NIH, and we were trying to understand self-efficacy and stereotype threat. Then we came to see that these areas have not been explored in depth for the faculty level. And if they're not explored in depth, then how do we begin to create solutions or do further research around that to improve any problems that we might be seeing, such as the problem with racial disparities in grant funding? One example of where I've applied these social-cultural factors is my work with an advanced grant from UMBC. This was an Advanced Hispanic Women in STEM grant, where there was a conference organized in October 2012 and October 2014. So what we're seeing is in Advance's portfolio, there was very little research on Hispanic women in STEM and Hispanic faculty in STEM in particular. So my colleagues at UMBC, Dr. Renetta Toll, built a relationship over time from 2003 until now. She's built a relationship with faculty in Puerto Rico, and we find that there are increasing numbers of Hispanic students in engineering programs and in STEM in the U.S., but the numbers, to be able to find large numbers of Hispanic women in STEM to understand what their experiences are in STEM, you can't always find that in mass number in one place in the U.S. So what do? You convene a conference in nice, sunny Puerto Rico. No, it's a convenient sample, but really to begin to understand what are the issues around advancement for Hispanic women in STEM. truly, it was a great opportunity to have built that relationship. So in this work around advanced women in STEM, this work is grounded in the concepts that I'm talking about, the socio-cultural factors that influence advancement, broadening participation and advancement. And some of those are culture, community, social and gender identity roles, additional interests or obligations that these women might have. How are these influencing, and program infrastructure. This work was started, and I think this is a really good example for university campuses like Purdue, and where we're having tragedies and things that happen on different campuses. The paper we've published is The Jessica Effect, Valuing Cultural and Familial Connections to Broaden Success in Academia. And when I say the Jessica Effect, that usually creates a lot of questions around what's the Jessica Effect. It almost sounds like an Amber Alert or a Silver Alert, and that's what it's designed to sound like. Jessica was a graduate student at UMBC in 2004 from Puerto Rico who died tragically in a murder-suicide by her husband, her spouse. She was a graduate student at UMBC, and her spouse was not. So she had this entire scientific community that she was growing into that her spouse didn't understand. He did not speak English as she did. So there were some familial dynamics going on in that situation that no one really understands that resulted in her death. As a result of that happening, our campus, our NSF AGET program increased two things. They increased Dr. Renata Toll, my mentor at UMBC, who is a provost but was the director of the program, told Jessica Sandlin in Puerto Rico that she would do whatever she could to make Jessica's legacy last. That was the beginning of the relationship that she built with Puerto Rico to increase more graduate students coming. But once these graduate students came to UMBC, how could you make their graduate student experience include their family? If they brought their family with them or their family that they left in Puerto Rico, how could you make their family understand what experience they were going through in graduate school, and would that impact their participation and performance and their ability to complete their graduate degrees? So as a result, that happened in 2004, and that you built that relationship, and that relationship led to this conference that we had in Puerto Rico, to now take the understanding just from graduate students, but to also to begin to understand Puerto Rican women that have succeeded in completing a PhD in science. What does it take for them to advance? We have another paper that's coming out. It's under review right now. I'm Hispanic female faculty in Puerto Rico, results from the workshop. So I've told you about where this effort has come from and how this relates to being these important social and cultural factors, and how you can use these factors to focus on retention and recruitment and advancement. And I'll talk to you a little bit now about the results of the workshop. So in the workshop, we wanted there's very little, again, empirical evidence about the experiences of Hispanic women faculty in science. So the purpose of that workshop was to create a community of Hispanic women in STEM, both in Puerto Rico, and then to connect them to connections in the U.S., but also to begin to get empirical evidence about what their experiences were like. So some of the empirical evidence that came out was their satisfaction with both their position and their career development. So the women that we surveyed, there were about 50 women in attendance in the conference, and 39 of them completed the survey. So 39 doesn't sound like a lot, but again, think about it in terms of 39 Hispanic women with PhDs in STEM. Who's seen 40 women with PhDs, Hispanic women with PhDs in STEM in the same room before? So if you think about it, this is a very unique data set. What we found were, did I switch these? What we found, this graph is actually their participation in committees in their department. So curriculum, graduate admissions, promotion, department advisory, and salary committees. How are women participating in committees in their department in terms of their leadership, and how is that influencing their advancement? So most of the women in this survey have participated in curriculum committees, so teaching. They're very involved in teaching in their universities, different universities throughout Puerto Rico, but they're not involved in promotion committees, they're not involved in salary committees, and minimal involvement in faculty search committees. This is preliminary, this is early data, and we'll have to link this data. But if you're not involved in faculty search and promotion committees, do you really understand what it takes to advance in your field? Are you able to get that understanding? And so this provided some empirical evidence and information that we were able to give back to administrators in Puerto Rico about what these faculty, their experiences were like. In terms of their satisfaction with their positions and advancement, they are very satisfied with their positions at the institution across the board. They're satisfied with their position. They enjoy their jobs. They enjoy teaching. Although less than 50% of them have an opportunity or funding to do research, they enjoy what they're doing, but it's mainly teaching. But very few of them, they are less satisfied with their career progression. So based on that data and based on my experiences at NIH, I've come up with recommendations of how to broaden, if you want to use social-cultural factors in broadening participation and advancement research, how can we do that? We need, in my mind, we need to broaden research, evaluation, and intervention. So in terms of research and interventions, it goes back to what I talked about initially. Widespread inclusion and promotion of researchers with lived experiences or a dedication to different populations. And that includes, or working success of different populations, race, gender, ability, and geography. Create new success-based metrics and outcomes, and develop and test new success-based models on social-cultural factors and social. One example of developing new metrics and outcomes is really thinking about what social-cultural factors we have. What are I talked to somebody this morning that said you all don't refer to professional skills as soft skills. They're professional skills. So mentoring being one example that I'm particularly interested in at NIH. Mentoring is really, really important. It's important for all funding, NIH and NSF. When we talk about broadening participation and increasing diversity, we know or we believe the importance of mentoring. But what variables, what standard variables do we have to be able to measure mentoring and link it to success? At NIH, when you apply for a postdoctoral fellowship or a graduate student fellowship and you go through the same application process that a grantee would go through, one of the metrics is your environment, but your environment is not just your resources and your facilities and your lab facilities, but it's who is your mentor. And the people who are selected to review NIH fellowship grants are people who are aware of mentoring capacity in different labs. And so your environment score is your mentoring score. So one of the ideas that I have to create a new metric is to look at the mentoring scores of applicants, and as I've been informed and starting to look at the data, you can have a really good scientific application at NIH in the fellowship arena, but if your mentoring score is low, you might not get funded. That's similar to NSF in terms of you can have a really good science idea, but sometimes if you don't have any broader impacts, you might not, get funded. So have we started to look at differences between mentoring scores or broader impact scores, and do they improve outcomes in terms of broader participation and advancement outcomes? That's a long-term goal of mine if I stay at NIH, but it's an example of a variable that's related to, it's a more social-cultural variable that we can use to see how we're having an impact. One last very important initiative at NIH now is big data, and big data to knowledge was a new funding initiative. One of the things that we need to do as evaluators, as social science researchers, is you need to think about how do we collect data without using surveys? What administrative data is already available? Talking to Dr. Orland today and Midfield is a really good example that preceded big data, but how do you use administrative data to provide you with either longitudinal or more data sets that provide you with more time points? But we as evaluators and social science researchers need to think about that. Engineering education, do you consider yourself social science researchers? No. Yes, some of us. Okay.
We're in engineering, but we use social science methods.
But you use social science, so you're hybrids. Great. But how can we use alternatives to surveys and alternatives to more burdensome data collection methods to collect some of the data that we need to collect? The role of policy. So I definitely take a policy approach because I'm at the National Science Foundation, and I'm not at the National Science Foundation, I'm at the National Institutes of Health. We are always looking at both our research programs, and at NIH they're referred to as diversity programs and not broadening participation programs. But how do we get the same outcomes or similar outcomes? How do we have success? Back to that original question that I presented initially. Have we seen success or have we seen failure? After 40 years and billions of dollars in diversity programming funding and no real large increases in representation in STEM, we've learned, but have we really seen the numeric increases that we want? And what's policy's role in this? So policy's role is to use empirical data and use research to build frameworks around diversity programs or broadening participation programs. And what do I mean by frameworks? At NIH, they've established a diversity programs evaluation framework. That framework is probably 2 years old, and no one wants to use it. But it's a framework to guide across NIH. There are probably over 100 different diversity programs in the 26 institutes and centers, but there's very little standardization on what should be the outcome metrics. And the metrics are not all the same, but the outcomes are the same. So how do you look at your outcomes for us who've been trained in evaluation? What's your logic model? What's your theory of change? What are the long-term and short-term outcomes that NIH as an organization would like to see as a result of its diversity programs? And if there's very little standardization, and there needs to be either a framework that's put into place that both NIH uses to evaluate, but that programs can use when they implement their diversity programs, when they implement their recruiting and retention efforts within their funding programs. We get calls from both students who want to participate in the diversity program, or it's not students, sometimes postdocs, who are unclear about whether they fit into a particular program. Their PIs sometimes are unclear. And that, to me, is a result of NIH not making it clear or not providing information in terms of to diversity programs. How do you legally wrap your recruitment and retention of the different groups that you want or need in your program? How do you legally wrap, and how do you provide guidance to PIs who are often scientists? Your PIs are biologists or whatever type of scientists in their field, and they really don't understand what the legal requirements are for diversity programs or how to go about reaching the different groups that they want to reach. So it's important to create a guide to frame these broadening participation and advancement programs and to link scientific funding to the framework and require reporting on broadening participation results. One new initiative at NIH are RPPR charts. So now NIH research participation and something else charts that NIH collects data on direct NIH-funded fellows, but there are tons of students who are in research labs who are funded by NIH that NIH for years just has not tracked. We don't know who those students' names are. You don't know what experiences they've had in an NIH-funded research lab if they're not a student. So now each lab, each grantee has to send in an RPPR chart with information from all of their students, and there are certain compliance requirements around that. But we're not doing the same thing for diversity, for NIH-funded diversity programs. We don't know who students are who are getting diversity supplements. We don't have electronic records of them. Anybody familiar with NIH's diversity supplement program? No. Diversity supplements are, you can be a supplement, a funded researcher on an already funded R01 grant. And you can, diversity in terms of all the different areas that I talk about, but that program is a paper-based program. The program has been, or it's not even a program, it's been around, and there's no electronic tracking of that. It's all collected via PDF. The applications are submitted via PDF. So when NIH said, oh, we want to evaluate our diversity supplement program, you don't have any data. So is that the initiative's fault? Is that the recipient's fault? No. It becomes, how do we link funding, and how do we have a framework related to that? And reward programs with improved broadening participation and advancement outcomes. I recently attended a White House STEM diversity event in the White House Office of Science, Technology, Policy, where Google was present, Facebook was present, Microsoft was present, and all of these organizations are also doing the same work that the federal government is doing, the same research that's being done around broadening participation and diversity is being done at Microsoft. But what we learned was Microsoft in particular really tied their performance, managers' performance, managers who did well in diversity recruiting and diversity advancement were put before the company and rewarded and used as examples for how to do this work. So I think that is important from a policy role as well, to reward programs that are really being successful, reward in terms of their funding and reward in terms of making them visible so that we can learn from them. How can you do this? So I talked a little bit about the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Program, and this is a picture of us. Each cohort takes a picture annually on the steps of the Capitol. But this is a program I talked about. It's for people with PhDs in STEM fields, and I'm not 100% sure, but I am 95% sure that everyone in here counts, because your PhD is from a college of engineering. And if you're an engineer, to work in this program, you don't have to have a PhD. You can have a master's in engineering and 6 years of work experience, and you could come in and do this program just like someone with a PhD in science. Now, for people with PhDs, you are required to be done with your PhD before you apply for this program. Applications are due in November, so if you are defending your dissertation in December, you have to wait until the next year, find another opportunity to participate in before you can apply. But it gives you, if you think you're interested in policy and you want to have some of these experiences, DC is not a place where you have to come and stay forever. It's full of transients, but it really gives you an experience in terms of federal government. You can do it as an early career. You can be an early career fellow, so many people do it after a postdoc or after their PhD. But many people do it mid-career. Many professors want, as they prepare to go into administration and go into university administration, and they want to understand either the funding process better, then they would do this Science and Technology Policy Fellowship Program. But I would never have found the group at NIH who was doing labor economics research on the biomedical research workforce had I not been inside NIH. I wouldn't know the data opportunities the opportunities they have to access and analyze their data had I not been inside. And even once you get inside, it is the federal government. There's a lot of bureaucracy. So, I mean, it's similar to a university, maybe on a larger scale. It's on a larger scale. But you have to be passionate about what you want to do, what your goals are, and you have to look for different avenues to reach those goals. So, and I definitely had to do that, and we could talk about that if you have more questions. If you're interested, then feel free to jot down my email, send me emails. If you're interested, I would love to put you in contact with the program staff that manages this program and to get some examples of people who have participated with similar degrees, so you could see where you would like to go. I'd like to thank Dr. DeBoer, Dr. Louie, and Loretta, and the entire School of Purdue, the Purdue School of Engineering Education for having me again, and I welcome any questions that you all might have.
Definitely have time for questions. I know you're not shy. I'm still thinking. Matt is.
So when you say 29% of the faculty of the Hispanic PhDs who are in the room that served on a search committee, I don't really have a good sense of what's normal. So I mean, like here, if it were this department, that would be low. On the other hand, if it were like electrical engineering at Purdue with, a ridiculous number of faculty, I don't know if they all serve, or I don't know how much they rotate that and everything else. So what do you think is sort of the right number?
So
it depends where they work, probably.
It depends. They're all in Puerto Rico.
They're what?
They're all in Puerto Rico. These are all women faculty at universities in Puerto Rico. So this conference was in San Juan, and we pulled from the UPR system, Universidad Metropolitana, several other systems in Puerto Rico, but these were all women or women faculty or postdocs, mainly faculty from Puerto Rico. I have the descriptors table if you want to talk about it. I can pull that up for how many were faculty, but I think it was 80% of them were faculty. But I think the comparison is 72% have served on a curriculum committee, and only 26% have. That's the important point that we want to talk about, is that you don't have equitable representation on all the different types of committees. So their experience is not equitable. Their experience in their position, their faculty position, is not equitable. And in particular, the promotion and faculty search committees. Our hypothesis, and we would have to collect additional data to understand that, and additional data was collected in 2014. But our hypothesis is you just don't understand the process, and that's anecdotally true for a lot of women faculty. Is, do you really understand the process to achieve tenure? So, really not good question, very good question. What's the normal comparison? But here we were trying to compare it to their other their service on other committees.
Okay, so if I may add here, a department advisory committee is like often an executive committee or something advising the department head, and that's a very powerful committee, and very few women have served on that committee compared with, say, the curriculum committee, black bars there.
And another point would be the black bars are how many have served, and the dots, you probably can't tell the difference, but the dots are how many people have chaired. So very few women, if any, they've chaired curriculum committees, but they haven't chaired any faculty. 10% have chaired a faculty search committee, 15% have chaired a promotion committee, 8% have chaired a departmental advisory committee, 8% have chaired a salary committee. So it tells you a little bit about both their service as well as their potential to lead on these committees. They haven't served, and there are very few opportunities to lead on these committees as well.
Other questions? Yes, Eric? Oh, sorry. I'm very interested in your a mentoring metric. How do you take mentoring and turn it into a score? And the other question is, what is this a score on an grant application?
Is there a fellowship application? Is there fellowship grant application? And if you're NIH grant applications are different from NSF, and most people in engineering education probably apply to NSF than NIH. But NSF, on their R01 application, as well as their fellowship applications for postdoctoral and graduate fellows, are rated in terms of 5 criteria.